The debate is finally happening tonight, and we'll break it all down next week in our special Independence Day episode. But today, we've got some really important news to talk about, and that is the state of Louisiana requiring every public school classroom to display the Ten Commandments. Is this constitutional? Does it violate the First Amendment? And what about the separation of church and state? We're going to dig deep into this topic today. Welcome to episode 39. I'm Blake Watson, and this is We the Free. One of the best ways you can help our show, other than by sharing today's content, is by picking up some We the Free merch at wethefreeshow.com. You can be the salt and light you are meant to be by wearing the Salt and Light shirt or by sipping your coffee from the Salt and Light mug, or you can sport the God Bless America shirt. And of course, the classic We the Free crest tee. We've got stickers and a Smells Like Freedom candle, so check out our merch today at wethefreeshow.com. The Ten Commandments were written 3,274 years ago. Moses did not actually write the Ten Commandments, though he's commonly attributed as the author or the initial lawgiver. The Judeo-Christian God, Yahweh, was the author of his Ten Commandments. And I don't just mean that he dictated these laws to Moses, and Moses was essentially like a scribe. Scripture actually shows us that God literally wrote them himself. Exodus 31:18 says, "When he had finished speaking with him, Moses, upon Mount Sinai, he gave Moses the 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone written by the finger of God." In the next chapter, we're told in Exodus 32:15 through 16, "Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets which were written on both sides. They were written on one side and the other. The tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing engraved on the tablets." The Torah, or the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, list a total of 613 laws or commands. 248 of these are positive commandments or commands to do certain things. The other 365 are negative commandments or prohibitive laws. Of the 613 mitzvot, you'll find all sorts of God-given commands on morality, ethics, rituals and ceremonies, civil order and judicial matters, diet, and purity. Now, why would 10 commands be so important among 613? Well, that would be like questioning the importance of the United States Constitution among the thousands of federal statutes and codes and regulations. And that's because, just as the Constitution served as the foundation for every other law, though we could argue their validity, the 10 Commandments served as the foundation for all Jewish law. And by that, I mean the written law, not the oral law, which would be developed by Jesus' day. In modern explanations, we split the 10 Commandments into 2 sections. The first 4 commands are vertical commands, or they're laws pertaining to our relationship with God. The final 6 commands are horizontal commands, or laws pertaining to our neighbors, or simply humanity. In other words, the 10 Commandments prioritizes our relationship with God first and foremost before it moves to human relationships. Before you read any of the 10 Commandments, you must realize the demonstration of God's will and His character in giving these commandments. They do not demonstrate a tyrannical, oppressive, hateful, and unjust figure in the sky. They reveal a holy, just, and loving God. If you can understand that, then and only then can you understand that God's commands are not rules to ruin the fun, but that they're protective boundaries. This perfectly connects to what I've been saying over the past year about the United States legal formation and foundation. American law was developed under the Judeo-Christian understanding of liberty connected to virtue. American freedom doesn't mean that you can do anything that you want to do or say anything that you want to say. For example, freedom of speech doesn't mean that you can say whatever you want, just as the Second Amendment doesn't mean that anyone and everyone can have guns. No, our laws, at least the foundational ones, are limits to preserve freedom, not to guaranteed unbridled existence, which only tends toward chaos and anarchy, destruction and vice. Well, just as we don't say the founding fathers wanted to ruin all the fun because laws are the limits to protect liberty, God's laws are for much the same purpose. Romans chapter 7, verse 12 explains it perfectly, as the Apostle Paul said, "The law is holy, and the commandment is holy and righteous and good." Holy, righteous, and good. It's not a stretch then to conclude that God's issuing these commands is a divine act of love, protection, grace, and generosity. However, there are other reasons for God's giving of the Ten Commandments, other than the obvious moral and ethical guidance, the social order, and spiritual and religious instruction. The Ten Commandments were given as part of the Mosaic covenant between God and the Israelites. Very simply put, God would bless them and protect them if they would follow these commands. Exodus 19, 5-6 says this, "Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." So you have an agreement between God and the people of Israel. Moses is essentially serving as a mediator. God's end of the deal are blessings and protection. The Israelite end of the deal is obedience and following these laws. Now, what happens when someone violates the terms of the agreement? Well, God will never fail to hold up his end of the deal. What would happen if the Israelites didn't obey the Lord? Well, we don't have time to read all of the scripture, but later you can look at Deuteronomy chapters 28 and 30, in which you'll find that the consequences for disobedience to the Lord's commands are the subtraction of God's blessings and protection. So they would receive curses and punishments, lose their many blessings, and they would be exiled and dispersed from their homeland. Just listen to all 10 of the original commands really quickly. I'm not reading them exactly as they're written, but I'm going in order with as much respect to the original language as possible. Number 1, you shall have no gods before me. Number 2, you shall not worship idols. 3, don't take the Lord's name in vain. 4, honor the Sabbath. So those are all the vertical commands having to do with our relationship to God. Now to the human relational commands, 5-10. Number 5, honor your parents. Number 6, do not murder. 7, do not commit adultery. 8, do not steal. 9, don't testify falsely or lie about your neighbor. And finally, number 10, do not covet. Over the last month, my wife and I were in Washington, D.C. for a few days, during which we visited the Supreme Court, which is our nation's highest court and the only court created by the Constitution. On the face of this building, at the eastern pediment, so the back side of the building, you'll see a sculptural group called Justice, the Garden of Liberty, at the center of which is Moses holding the Ten Commandments. This was created in the early 1930s, but there's a reason that Moses and the Ten Commandments are the center point facing eastward toward all the United States. The Ten Commandments bear the foremost responsibility for the moral framework of Western legal tradition, not just in America by itself. Simple concepts, innate concepts like laws against murder, theft, and bearing false witness are staples of Western, and in our case, U.S. law. But more importantly, America was founded on the principles that form Judeo-Christian ethics, and there's no serious debate over that. I did a whole monologue on this on April 18th, which we'll link to, about the American identity, in which I clearly demonstrated that all of the founders, all of them, believed in the virtues, ethics, and morality of Judeo-Christianity. But connecting this back to the Ten Commandments, these 10 commands of the Mosaic Law contribute to the Western and American understanding of natural law, which informs us that certain rights, so think about what the laws protect. The contributions the Ten Commandments make to natural law posits that certain rights and values are innate and inherent in human nature and can be understood through human reason, which is why people like Jefferson supported it. And the English world, America included, developed much of our common law from the legal precedents set by the Ten Commandments. In other words, the Ten Commandments are very much woven into the fabric of the American legal system and the founding and the moral and ethical foundation of the United States of America. However, the church has failed so poorly, and the people have become so immoral and ignorant, and the education system has been so corrupted that we have stories like this from the past week.
Louisiana has become the very first state in the nation to require the Ten Commandments be displayed in all public school classrooms. The law is already facing legal challenges from civil liberty groups who are going after it for a violation of the separation between church and state. Chief Religion Correspondent Lauren Green is on this for us. Lauren.
Hey, Harris. Well, the proponents of the bill believe the Supreme Court will be on their side in any of the legal challenges and predict other states will start to follow Louisiana's lead. The Ten Commandments are part of the bedrock of Judaism and Christianity. But the state's Republican governor, Jeff Landry, argues they also have historical significance as a huge influence on America's founding documents and our legal system. And Governor Landry signed the bill into law yesterday alongside several other education-related measures. The GOP drafted legislation mandates that a poster-sized display of the Ten Commandments in large, easily readable font be required in all public classrooms from kindergarten up to state-funded universities. Within minutes of the signing, a group of civil liberty organizations announced they plan to file a lawsuit challenging the bill as a blatant violation of the separation of church and state, saying in a joint statement, HB 71 will result in unconstitutional religious coercion of students who are legally required to attend school and are thus a captive audience for school-sponsored religious messages. Supporters of the bill are confident the High Court will side with them in a legal battle, as there is a new litmus test for holding up religious symbols that are part of America's founding.
I told you all months ago that we're engaged in a battle, let alone the spiritual battle, for our nation's very soul. President Biden even said so in his State of the Union speech. This is a massive move in the fight, as Louisiana becomes the very first state in the country to require the Ten Commandments in every public classroom in the entire state. The commandments are to be posted in the classrooms in a large, easily readable font, and the bill even specifies exactly what the poster should state. The commands are in King James English, and each poster must include the following explanation. Now, don't miss this. The Ten Commandments were a prominent part of American public education for almost 3 centuries. Around the year 1688, the New England Primer became the first published American textbook and was the equivalent of a first-grade reader. The New England Primer was used in public schools throughout the United States for more than 150 years to teach Americans to read and contained more than 40 questions about the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments were also included in public school textbooks published by educator William McGuffey, a noted university president and professor. A version of his famous McGuffey Readers was written in the early 1800s and became one of the most popular textbooks in the history of American education, selling more than 100 million copies. Copies of the McGuffey Readers are still available today. The basis for this decision was that the people of the state of Louisiana elected a Republican governor, Jeff Landry, and a Republican legislature who promised to bring drastic reforms to the education system and common sense back to the classrooms in Louisiana. And that's almost a direct quote from Governor Landry. Other states are already following suit, like Texas, for example. Republican Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick said, Senate Bill 1515 would require Texas public elementary and secondary schools to display the Ten Commandments in each classroom and will bring back this historical tradition of recognizing America's heritage and remind students all across Texas of the importance of a fundamental foundation of American and Texas law, the Ten Commandments. President Trump expressed his opinion on Truth Social. This was written in all caps, so for our sake, I've written it more properly. He said, I love the Ten Commandments in public schools, private schools, and many other places for that matter. Read it. How can we as a nation go wrong? This may be, in fact, the first major step in the revival of religion, which is desperately needed in our country. Bring back the Ten Commandments. Though I disagree with President Trump on a couple of things here, he's right about a couple things as well, which I'll explain today. There's absolutely nothing wrong about plastering the Ten Commandments everywhere. And secondly, this could very well be something which promotes revival in America. Now, one more quote from the news on this. This one from Louisiana Republican State Representative Dottie Horton. She makes an important point for all of us in saying, given all the junk our children are exposed to in classrooms today, it is imperative that we put the Ten Commandments back in a prominent position. Not only does that illustrate the culture war and the spiritual battle and the fight for America's identity, it explains in part that this was a consequence of the pervasive liberalism in the public classroom, which we'll talk about today. Now, obviously, this is going to be strongly opposed. The ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union, has already vowed to get involved here. This will surely become another case before the Supreme Court, which, again, has Moses and the Ten Commandments as its center point of the Eastern facade. But though this may be the first case of the Ten Commandments in public school, it's surely not the first case involving public schools and Christianity or the Ten Commandments in other public spaces. All of the resistance revolves around two things: the First Amendment's Free Exercise Clause and Establishment Clause, and its predecessor, the state of Virginia's Bill for Establishing Religious Freedom under Governor Thomas Jefferson in 1779. The latter of which is where we get the doctrine of separation between church and state. Since the Virginia Bill and the separation doctrine came first, let's start with that. But consider the issue at hand. We're talking about a poster in every public school classroom in Louisiana. Okay? Compare today's situation with that of 1779. The Virginia Assembly drafted the Bill for Establishing Religious Freedom because of the local context at the time. During the colonial era, Virginia, like the other colonies, had an established church, which in Virginia's case was the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, because they were British. The established church meant that tax revenues from all residents, regardless of their religious beliefs, supported the Anglican Church. This included taxes that were allocated for the maintenance of Anglican ministers and the churches themselves. But by the late 18th century, Virginia had become religiously diverse enough with significant numbers of Baptists and Presbyterians, Methodists, and Quakers, and other denominations. So advocates for religious freedom, including Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, argued that compelling individuals to support a church they did not belong to through taxation violated their natural rights to religious liberty. That's where the bill comes along. I've already done a 30-minute segment on this subject back in August. We'll link to that as well if you want to see my explanation of the actual text of the bill. But for today's purposes, I'm just going to summarize. The bill affirms the people have the natural right to hold any beliefs or to be involved with organized religion or not at all without any interference or coercion or force by the government. This is very important, and we'll come back to all of this later, but just remember that element of force in all this. The bill also claims that no one can be compelled or, again, forced to attend or support any religious institution, and that no one will be punished or fined or imprisoned for their beliefs or lack thereof. Next, the bill established a prohibition of sorts, claiming that religious belief or affiliation holds no importance for election to public office. It doesn't say that you can't have Christians or Jews, etc., in government. It prohibits the requirement. So that's 2 of 3 important aspects, but this last one was very important for what it would inspire in the First Amendment. The Virginia bill ensured that churches and religious institutions could and would maintain their autonomy, and they won't be subject to state control. Again, this was only in Virginia that we're talking about, but it barred the Virginia state government from interfering. Allow me to repeat. It prohibited the government there in Virginia from interfering with churches and their practices. The bill eventually passed in 1786, but just 5 years after that, the federal government would ratify the Bill of Rights. Now, I feel like I say this about once a month, but the Bill of Rights is a list of civil liberties for the people of the United States. Simultaneously, the Bill of Rights is a list of restrictions on the U.S. government. So when the First Amendment inscribed the freedom of speech, the framers were protecting the people from the government's coercion of speech or speech control. Remember the element of force? We're talking about a group of people who had not only just beaten a tyrannical world power, who had not only fled religious persecution in multiple parts of Europe, but who also knew their world history and politics and philosophy better than just about anyone at the time. So as they're thinking about the future and the longevity of this new nation, here they are boxing the government in to preserve genuine liberty. Now there's a little caveat here. You know that if you listen to my show that I confidently hold that there's no such thing as absolute freedom. I mentioned this a minute ago, but I don't believe that you can just do whatever you want or say whatever you want. That's literally the reason why we have laws, because liberty lives within laws. Remember that. Liberty lives within laws. Why do I bring that up? Well, because it's important to understand that it's illogical to think that the founders and framers believed that religious freedom meant that you can do whatever you want in the name of religion and the government can't do anything about it. That's obviously not true. But what does the text of the amendment actually say? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Do you know who wrote that? James Madison. That's the same James Madison who would have been serving in the Virginia House of Delegates in 1779 when they wrote the bill establishing religious freedom. So the same author who wrote the separation doctrine wrote the First Amendment. So don't miss the connections. Remember the elements of true liberty and tyrannical force, and let's break down each part of this freedom of religion. What is the first word of the amendment? Congress. And who or what is that? That would be the legislative branch of the federal government. That is a really important specification because they didn't say states there, referring to local governments. The United States has and has had a federalist system since our national birth, meaning that power is divided between the federal government and the states. So you're going to see a fight over this very subject related to this case. The ACLU is going to argue that Louisiana is violating the First Amendment, and I'm sure others may claim the supremacy clause in Article 6 of the Constitution, that it gives the federal government power over Louisiana. And then proponents of the bill will claim that the 10th Amendment's principles of federalism, that Louisiana has the constitutional authority to do what it's doing. Whatever happens, the First Amendment is a restriction on the federal or central government, specifically the House and Senate, from two things. What are the two things that they were barred from? Well, first, let's remember what we learned about the separation doctrine. People have the natural right, meaning that like it's from God. People have the natural right to hold any beliefs or to be involved with organized religion or not at all without any interference or coercion or force by the government. No one may be compelled or forced to attend or support any religious institution, and no one can be punished for their beliefs or lack thereof. That, my friends, is the foundation for free exercise. When the First Amendment says that Congress may not make any laws prohibiting the free exercise of religion, the separation doctrine is its backdrop. In other words, the central government cannot force you to be a Christian, obviously. But there's another part. The Virginia bill also ensured that churches and religious institutions could and would maintain their autonomy, and they won't be subject to state control. The local and historical context, again, was the tax money being allocated to the Anglican Church. That, my friends, is the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. So put all of this together. The Virginia bill for establishing freedom, where we got the separation doctrine, inspired the free exercise and establishment clauses of the First Amendment. They were written by the same people and they mean the same things. But as you'll see in a moment, justices and judges, numerous times, have attempted, and much of the time successfully, to separate the two clauses of freedom of religion. They treat free exercise and establishment as two separate things when they're meant to go together. But I want to make one important point here. What do you think inspired Jefferson and Madison to write these things? Were they simply complying with their constituents' wishes? No, if you've been paying attention, you know that it was their faith and their Judeo-Christian understanding of liberty that informed these decisions. Did you hear what I just said? In other words, it was their religion which created the legal standards for religion in the United States. If I interpret the law as so many liberals have, then their drafting of the separation doctrine and the First Amendment would collapse on themselves with the liberal logic. It took the Christian understanding of freedom to arrive at the bill from 1779 and the amendments in 1791. Without that, who knows where we would be now? Atheistic societies don't usually work out too well. If you can understand that fact along with the 10th Amendment, then it makes sense to learn that Connecticut and Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maryland, and South Carolina all continued to have established churches or state-sponsored churches for another 40 years after the ratification of the First Amendment. Since then, there have been a number of Supreme Court cases involving every bit of what we've just discussed. And the reason that I've just gone through every bit of it with you is that I'm sure that we're about to witness an endless barrage of legal experts on all the major news programs who aren't legal experts at all, just a bunch of liberal hacks who hate God, Christians, and Jews. In the midst of all this history and legal muck and mire, throw into the mix case law. Case law is essentially legal precedent which informs consecutive or later cases in their own decisions. For example, the ruling of Roe v. Wade made abortion permissible for about 50 years. It was the legal precedent. It's not national law, it's just legal precedent. So whenever a case involving abortion would come up, Roe v. Wade had set the precedent, and the ruling from that case would inform relevant cases for 50 years. However, a new case came before the Supreme Court in 2021, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, which came to a different conclusion. That overturned the ruling of the Roe v. Wade decision and created a new legal precedent. Keep this example in mind as we consider a few cases related to our subject today. The first case, and this is important, was Lemon v. Kurtzman. In this 1971 case, there were two laws being challenged. One was a Pennsylvania law that reimbursed religious schools for secular educational services. And two, a Rhode Island law that provided salary supplements to teachers in religious schools who taught secular subjects. The argument was that both of these laws violated the Establishment Clause, but just remember, as we've already stated, the Establishment Clause cannot and must not be separated from the Free Exercise Clause. Well, the Supreme Court ultimately reached a unanimous decision that both laws were unconstitutional. But the key outcome, which came from this case, was what was known as the Lemon Test, a test to determine if a law violates the Establishment Clause. Here's the three criteria. Number one, the law must have a secular purpose. Number two, the law's primary effect must neither advance nor inhibit religion. Yeah, we'll talk more about that later. And finally, number three, the law must not result in an excessive government entanglement with religion. So the Lemon Test would be used numerous times in the next 50 years, like in Agostini v. Felton in 1997, Van Orden v. Perry in 2005, Town of Greece versus Galloway in 2014, and American Legion versus American Humanist Association in 2019. But we'll come back to the Lemon Test in a moment. In 1980, the Supreme Court ruled in Stone v. Graham that a Kentucky law requiring the posting of the Ten Commandments in public school classrooms was unconstitutional. Now listen, the court stated that the display was, quote, plainly religious in nature, end quote, and that it violated the Establishment Clause. In Van Orden v. Perry of 2005, the Supreme Court upheld They upheld the constitutionality of the Ten Commandments monument on the grounds of the Texas state capitol. The court reasoned that the monument had, listen to this, historical and educational significance and did not solely promote a religious message. On the same day as the Van Orden v. Perry decision in 2005, the Supreme Court also ruled in McCreary County v. ACLU of Kentucky that displays of the Ten Commandments in 2 Kentucky courthouses were unconstitutional because their, listen to this, their primary purpose was to advance religion. In this situation with Louisiana, it's the same opponent, the American Civil Liberties Union, which are surely going to sue them, and this will probably be their argument again. Now, you can see how the Lemon test was used throughout all those cases. Secular purpose, primary effect, and excessive entanglement. But there's one problem. In Kennedy v. Bremerton School District, a case from 2022, so just 2 years ago, a high school football coach had been fired for praying on the field after games. Do you remember this? You may have heard about it. Kennedy had been told to stop. He didn't listen, and he continued to pray with his players, so he was fired. And after he was fired, listen to this, he sued them for violating his First Amendment rights to free speech and free exercise of religion. And all the leftists are screaming, but he's a public school teacher and he's establishing religion. Yeah, do you see now the problem with separating the 2 clauses which together comprise freedom of religion? Well, the district court ruled against him. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against him. But then the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in his favor. Why is that? Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote the majority opinion emphasizing that Kennedy's prayers were a form of private speech protected by the free speech and free exercise clauses of the First Amendment. He stated that the school district's actions were not justified by concerns over an Establishment Clause violation because Kennedy's prayer was private and not, get this, listen, coercive. Here's what Gorsuch wrote. Given the apparent shortcomings associated with Lemon's ambitious, abstract, and ahistorical approach to the Establishment Clause, this court long ago abandoned Lemon. In place of Lemon in the endorsement test, this court has instructed that the Establishment Clause must be interpreted by reference to historical practices and understandings. In other words, the Lemon test simply could not work. It's too abstract and it couldn't be consistently applied. So instead, the Supreme Court will look to history. What were the intentions of the framers of the Constitution? All of this should tell you exactly where this is headed. But there's another wrinkle in this issue, which is really important. Here's what the AP wrote. Under the law, state funds will not be used to implement the mandate. The posters would be paid for through donations. This, to my knowledge, is a new precedent in a case like this. Consider the source material for the separation doctrine. Some Virginians didn't want their tax dollars being used to support the Anglican Church in Virginia. This idea has come up several times in similar cases, like state or county funds being used for school vouchers. Well, in Louisiana's situation, all of this is being privately funded. I keep pointing out the force or the coercion aspect of all of this because posting the Ten Commandments in public school classrooms is not forcing anyone or any children, for that matter, to be Christian or to live according to the Christian standards which are inscribed in the Ten Commandments. But here's the truth, which I've already basically mentioned. Liberals don't have a problem necessarily with the constitutionality of all this. they've got a problem with God. And as I keep telling you, there's just about nothing in life which isn't connected to spirituality. This is not just a cultural debate or battle. This is spiritual warfare. This is good versus evil. Why do you think they're flipping out and suing over the 10 Commandments in public schools and courthouses and public properties? Well, because it's against their religion. In episode 30, America's New Religion, I clearly and plainly explained that the left is just as religious as we are, because everyone worships a God. Everyone has a belief system, and everyone is religious. We worship Yahweh, they worship the self. We have Christianity or Judaism, they have secularism, liberalism, and idolatry. We have a biblical worldview. They have a secular worldview. It really is this simple. This is good versus evil, light versus dark, wickedness versus righteousness, and so on. This is why it's acceptable for a public school teacher to hang a pride flag or something related. But as soon as you bring the 10 Commandments into the class, whoa, stop right there. Yeah, it's the wicked forces screeching and howling because goodness and righteousness is piercing through the darkness. Think about the simple commands. No gods before Yahweh. No. We're going to reject your God. We're going to be our own gods. You can't tell me what to do. Second, you shall not worship idols. No, we are going to worship money, success, materialism, celebrity, fitness, etc. You can't tell me what to do. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. Yeah, okay, watch me. Honor the Sabbath. Yeah, no thanks. I'm going to work 7 days a week, or I'm going to do what I want to do on Sunday or Saturday. I'm not raising my family in a hypocritical den of thieves like that. No way. Honor your parents. Oh, my parents are bigots. My grandparents are racists. The past generations don't deserve any of our honor and respect. Don't murder. No, actually, I'm not going to be held down in life, so I'm going to kill any baby that I ever get pregnant with. No. Success is too important, so I've got to have an abortion. No, I've got to be a girl boss, so have an abortion. Don't commit adultery. No, I'm just going to sleep with whomever I want. No, I'm not going to get married. I'm just going to hook up with people. No, I'm going to consume as much pornography as I want. Don't tell me what I can and can't do. Don't steal. Well, I will if I have to. Now, you know, these immigrants deserve to be here, right? Don't testify falsely about your neighbor. Yeah, that never happens either. And finally, don't covet, if that's not the antithesis of our culture today. Do you see what I'm saying? The 10 Commandments are raining on their parade. And the threat of the 10 Commandments in every public school classroom in the state of Louisiana cannot be tolerated because it defies their religion. Do you remember what the consequences were for Israel not obeying the 10 Commandments? They would receive curses and punishments, lose their many blessings, and they would be exiled and dispersed from their homeland. What does that sound like? My pastor just talked about this week. God delivers his judgment in three ways. By the sword, so Israel would be attacked by foreign enemies. By famine, so Israel would have serious financial problems. And by pestilence or mass sickness, you could say like an epidemic or a pandemic. What does that sound like? Sounds like America. We need the 10 Commandments now, more than ever in our nation's history, to be plastered on every corner, and its precedences enforced in court. We need to call up our governor's offices and our state representatives and tell them to follow Louisiana's lead here. In closing, I leave you with the words of Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 6. He said, "These words which I'm commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons," or you could say children, "and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Then it shall come about when the Lord your God brings you into the land which he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you great and splendid cities, which you did not build, and houses full of all good things which you did not fill, and hewn cisterns which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, and you eat and are satisfied. Then watch yourself that you do not forget who brought you from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall fear only the Lord your God, and you shall worship him and swear by his name. You shall not follow other gods, any of the gods of the peoples who surround you, for the Lord your God in the midst of you is a jealous God. Otherwise, the anger of the Lord your God will be kindled against you, and he will wipe you off the face of the earth." Well, that's going to do it for me. What'll it be next time? We'll see. For now, go and be the salt and light you are meant to be, and we'll see you next time on We the Free. Thanks for watching this clip today. Listen, I want to make sure that you stay informed on the news and the biblical response to it. So do yourself and us a favor and hit the subscribe button before you go. And then we'd love for you to check out WeTheFreeShow.com to grab yourself some merch to help spread the word of We the Free. And right now we're going to put a video on the screen that we think you'll like. Now go and be that salt and light, and we'll see you next time.